kind of with an opening for us.
Okay. I decided to give a part of the Harinasani Thanksgiving prayer. This is a address and prayer that's given. It's by the Iroquois people, Mohawk people, Harinasani. And it's something that they have given to the world. They want it shared. So I'm going to give just a little bit of the address for you. So I'm going to ask everyone to close their eyes. Today we have gathered and we see that the cycles of life continue. We have been given the duty to live in balance and harmony with each other and all living things. So now we bring our minds together as one as we give greetings and thanks to each other as people. Now our minds are one. We are thankful to our mother, the earth, for she gives us all that we need for life. We are thankful for the enlightened teachers. We gather our minds to greet and thank the enlightened teachers who have come to help throughout the ages. When we forget how to live in harmony, they remind us of the way that we were instructed to live as people. With one mind, we send greetings and thanks to these caring teachers. Now we turn our thoughts to the Creator, or Great Spirit, and send greetings and thanks for all the gifts of creation. Everything we need is here on Mother Earth. Everything we need to live a good life is here. Let us pile up thanks like a heap of flowers on a blanket. We will each take a corner and toss it high in the sky, so our thanks will be as rich as the gifts of the world that shower down upon us. For all the love that is around us, we gather our minds together as one and send our choicest words of greetings and thanks to the Creator and to one another. And now our minds are one. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Okay, we're going to begin with Michele. And Michele is going to address the concept that the client does not go anywhere or can't access content to a past life.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Holly, very much. And again, it's really great to be in the company of other past life regression therapists. I just wanted to say that. It's not often that we're in a room, so many of us, even though it's a virtual room, a Zoom room, but it really is nice to be with folks who speak the same language and share, a lot of the same experiences. So, and just to say a couple of words about my practice, leading into talking about, what to do when someone does not or seems not to access past life regression memories immediately or, as you go on, within some time frame, as you're holding the intention for that. So I've been in my business since 2002 full time and, making a living at this solely, even though I'm not a licensed counselor and I offer other holistic, methods, but the bulk, I imagine it is for you guys too, and you can share in the chat. Certainly the bulk of my client caseload, is new inquiries and returning clients who are seeking past life regression therapy. So just to remind us that, this is very much in demand, although it takes lots of actions, major actions, mini actions, and, business strategies and developing good systems and honing our skills and networking and building our relationships and our reputation and putting content out there and a million other details. Still, when you get to a place where you're established for the most part, then we could say we've worked with so many hours, it adds up to the thousands, and so many people really adds up to the thousands over years, really making a difference. So more than anything else, our experience teaches us, like the clients themselves, teach us. Each client, no matter what, gives me something, a little something new, right? Is a teacher for me as much as I am a teacher for them. So I think a lot of looking at these, some of these challenges is a matter of flexing the muscle of thinking on our feet and meeting clients where they are on a dime, right? And as much as we follow a set routine or a sequence or a process, we're reminded not to get too attached to that routine and to also be able to be in the moment with our clients as it unfolds. And if you're like me, just sort of relying on our intuition, thank goodness for our intuition, when almost like when all else fails, it seems we can rely on that as much as our training and our experience. So if you're, done what you usually do and you're leading a client into a past life and they're not, it doesn't happen that often that they do not go into a past life at all, at least in my experience. So, knowing what sort of that realm of normal is important. And of course, not panicking. I don't think you do. And maintaining your confidence and your stability and trusting your professional experience, of course, that you can handle that. So, and I always sort of work into the equation that some people need more time and assistance. That's really it is. It's really more a matter of they just need some more time, some more patience. We just need to slow it down, or they just need more assistance. We need to amp up our assistance, our a little bit more of leading, assertively and hand holding. Some need that more than others. And it depends on how well you know your clients. If it's a first-time client, you won't know that. Maybe you can glean a little bit of that just from your intake or the conversations that you have. But I don't know if you're like me. Sometimes I'll say to myself, I think this person, like before we meet, I think this person's going to go right into a past life and they're going to have a very vivid experience, and they don't. Or the opposite. I will have maybe an impression. I can be wrong, right? Sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong, where it's like, I don't know if they will. And yet they have this really vivid, powerful experience, so it's sort of balancing, that out and knowing that we do, of course, want to exhaust every avenue before giving up. And I don't know that giving up is really an option. Not really, because even when the rare occasion is that a client cannot go into a past life after trying many other doors, many other angles, many other ways. There's more than one path to a past life, of course, we know. Still, I will try to give them the most value anyway for the time we're spending together that we might have left by maybe doing some hypnotherapy, just sort of for what a goal, or some visualization or meditation, and there's value, or healing, just, healing work with them as well. So first, it's really important to remember that being proactive often prevents this. No guarantees, right? But meaning that, remember to, in your pre-talk, your pre-trance discussion is super important. It's really critical. I find that for the most part, just by setting a strong out loud intention and engaging their body language and what they're saying, to know that they're aligning with that intention. So they're really clicking into that intention, right? So they're really sending to themselves positive messaging about what's going to happen, by you setting that positive messaging in place. And of course, I'm sure I don't have to remind you to just always remain positive throughout, especially if sometimes they will get frustrated. Sometimes clients will get frustrated immediately, depending on the person's personality. They'll get frustrated immediately if they don't go into a past life, or as it goes on, as it elongates, then their frustration may build. So it's really critical that we might feel their frustration, that we don't get sucked into their frustration. And from our experience, we know that, just to stay positive. And often, though, in that, talking about it phase prior to trance, helping them manage their expectations and clearing up any misconceptions, addressing, and I always address with them the doubting mind. And I just tell them, hey, it's regular, it's normal that the doubting mind will come in. And sometimes they're not reaching a past life because of that self-talk or the doubt that's in their mind. And so it's a matter of clearing that up first. Also managing our own expectations. I mean, ideally, we'd love in an ideal world for every client to get those immediate, clear, colorful images that flow, and most do. Some don't, but it's all sort of on a spectrum. So if someone reports, blurry images versus no images, sometimes we want to say something is better than nothing. Anything. We're fishing a little bit in the beginning sometimes. So anything's better than nothing, and whatever they provide and present, I'm going to hook into that and try to dive deeper into that to expand upon and embellish into whatever it is that they are presenting. And so sometimes just by saying to them, okay, allow that image to come more into view. Can we allow that image to crystallize more? Can materialize? Let's turn up the volume, maybe we could say. Create a metaphorical symbolic image they can use in their mind that gives them the control of, bringing that image more like into view, dialing it in, or like a lens, dialing it in, and offering them those suggestions, imagery-based or feeling-based suggestions. They can latch on to that very often, and that will do the trick to bring it forward, to bring the memory forward more. Then, of course, if they're, you've tried that and maybe some other things, if they're still struggling, they may just need more deepening. And sometimes clients will actually say that. They'll say, like, I don't think I'm deep enough. So, okay, we take that on face value. Okay, then let's backtrack. Or they don't say that, but you sense that, or we know that may be what the barrier is. Backtrack, more deepening techniques. Not start all over again, but sort of pick up there and do more deepening techniques. So whatever that is for you. So it may be not spending too much time there, but more breathing, more muscle relaxation, more counting, more stares, right? But the whole time you want to normalize it with them, for them. Remember, you're the authority more than they are of past life regression therapy in general. So they're going to trust your authority speaking from experience. This happens to the best of us. Okay. So normalizing that, not wanting them to feel judged or self-conscious. I'm aware of that. So like, we're always juggling multiple hats, multiple things. We don't want them to go too much into analysis.
Okay,
right?
Michele, we need to close your presentation so we have time for everybody. So see if you can kind of sum it up for us, please.
Sure, I can definitely do that. Yeah, so then I'll just quickly say some of the other things that are actions with that is if they see darkness or nothing, I will ask them, is it dark because it's nighttime, or is it dark because there's nothing? And then with either of those options, if it's nighttime, then that we can latch onto that. If it's just dark, then we could do some images of just bringing a light in or bringing another door in. Sometimes I will do just a brief age regression or just ask them, is that okay? Can we just visit very briefly a pleasant or neutral benign childhood memory first as a way of going back? Sometimes I can just do a peaceful imagery, a fantasy place first to engage and deepen the experience. And then just lots of positive reinforcement and more leading and hand holding. So I hope that gives some doable actions there.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Andy's going to go next. And Andy's topic is, your client feels guilty having a spontaneous regression or engaging in a past life session because their religion doesn't support the concept of reincarnation.
Okay, well, in terms of spontaneous regressions, I do that all the time. I very rarely use hypnosis because I find emotional bridges and physical bridges are much quicker. So that's explained to our clients at the beginning. And the focus I do is to resolve clients' therapeutic problem. And I explain the past life. They may have an experience that looks like a past life. If someone's got a religious background, it can be explained away as a metaphor. but it comes from them. You know, dreams, for example, come from a person. They can be very healing. So I explain it that way. So I take away the fact that a past life is real or not. If someone comes in and they want to specifically have a past life, you know, they've got an interest in it, then I would explain past lives a different way. So I don't really have any problems with people's religious backgrounds because of how I work. And sometimes the therapy session may be current life work. It may not involve past lives. So I go to where the problem is. I mean, for example, a client came to me and early in the interview said, I hope you got some tissues, which was a bit of a red flag. And I said, what's been happening? He said, well, I've just lost my husband. And then the tears flooded out. And that's where she needed to be. She needed to be in with her husband and resolving that current life issue. So, you know, any attempt to go into a past life or elsewhere was really pointless. You have to really flow with where the energy is. So that's my answer.
Right. Thank you. Okay, so Patricia's next. And Patricia, your topic is your client is re-traumatized by doing a past life regression.
Okay. You know, I just want to circle back to the question that was asked of Michele, in that I think one thing to keep in mind, and especially if we work with affect, not everybody's visual. So this idea that we have to get an image to be in a past life is actually quite, to me, a materialistic, reductionist, rationalistic kind of overlay that's part of our society today. To me, and I know it in my experience, is that people, I've done my own regressions where my body told the whole story. I didn't have a single picture. And it happened to be one of the most core stories to my soul that healed my fear of public speaking. So to me, affect is everything, right? And affect doesn't always involve imagery. Most people are kinesthetic and clairsentient. So I just want to say that, because to me, I don't ever have a client that doesn't get anything. Because if you start with affect, they're in it. They may not get images, but they're in it. And you always work with affect. I tell my students all the time, affect trumps everything, including image. So anyway, sorry, it was on my mind and I talk to my students about this all the time. So re-traumatization, I think first you need to discern what is re-traumatization, because there are things that can happen after a session that are not necessarily re-traumatization, yet the client is still experiencing affect or something. So I think first you need to discern, and this will come up in your interview when you talk with the client, has the content that arose during the session, what is that content similar to something that happened in this lifetime? And especially when we talk about abusive or sexual trauma, and the unfortunate circumstance that so many people have experienced that in their current life, as well as past lives, that's where you're going to get a carryover. So if you don't go from and you should know this going into it, if you don't go from the past life back to the current life, there will still be residue. So you always have to, especially if there's resonance, even like what Andy said with his woman that came in deep grief. Had they gone to another life, which he didn't, and I agree, I would not have done the same thing either, especially when something is that active, that affect is that active. But if you did, you would still have to come back to the current life. Otherwise, the client would still leave with the current life affect. So that's one thing. Second, I think sometimes what people can think is re-traumatization is further content coming up. And in my experience, and I'm sorry, I didn't say, I've started full-time in 2003, so I've been doing it a while too. In my experience, the similar content coming up is because, themes constellate in the subconscious around particular affect. So that could be your abandoned. I always say we have an abandonment file or a lost lover file and if you open up that file and you don't go to a core story, all of the other content is still going to be rumbling there, right? And I'm not saying we always go to a core story. We don't. That's where you're working with a client and on peeling layers of the onion. But when you hit a file, let's talk about the abandonment file, and you do one story, but there's actually 20 in there in the soul's memory, then yes, there can still be residue. The other stories may be similar on the theme, but have different, like I call it, like facets of a diamond. So that's not necessarily re-traumatization. And then I think we also have to consider that modern psychology today and the way they deal with trauma is really quite medieval sometimes. And, I saw something that the VA was using virtual reality to recreate traumatic scenes and bring veterans back into it. So I know Peter's shaking his head. I agree. I almost lost it when I read that's cutting edge therapy to them. What modern psychology thinks of as desensitization is re-traumatization. What happens to the psyche in the pattern of PTSD is re-traumatization, right? What we are doing is breaking the cycle of traumatization, because PTSD itself, just because of the way the psyche is structured, will continue to re-traumatize, right? So what we are doing, and again, if done correctly, we break that cycle by allowing the completion of the particular hidden impulse, whatever the buried impulse was, which is at the base of the cause of PTSD because it was unable to be expressed. So you give that ability to release that, and there will be no re-traumatization. There may be other aspects that come up that can be dealt with in other sessions. Another one I just want to mention quickly that comes to mind, because it does happen, and you have to be aware of this. When you have different genders dealing with each other on sexual trauma, there is quite frequently, and I'm not going to say always, but there is quite frequently transference that happens that's subconscious, right? So a male dealing with a woman who's going through a sexual trauma, after the session, residues of that anger at the aggressor or that grief or that whatever it is can be projected onto the therapist of the opposite sex. That is also something to be aware of. But as far as pure re-traumatization, I would say I've actually never seen it in 20 some odd years of practice.
Thank you, Patricia.
Okay,
Michele.
Holly, could I just add one thing
course.
to it? I mean, that was a wonderful presentation of a difficult subject by Patricia. When I've worked with people that have had multiple deep trauma, for example, someone who perhaps been repeatedly raped, each of those rape issues in itself has to be processed and worked through. And there's only so much you can do in a session. So if you're clearing one session, one memory completely, there's still residue from the other sessions, and some of that may come up. And it looks like re-traumatization, but it's not. It just needs to settle. And then when the client comes in, you can work in the next until eventually you've cleared all of the trauma points.
I would definitely ditto that.
Thank you. Okay, Michele, your next one is, out of fear, your client avoids going into the death experience in the past life.
Okay, sorry. Yes, so I really like everything that Patricia and Andy was saying as well. So if a client avoids going into the death experience in a past life, again, I circle back again to say some of those fears can potentially be prevented during the discussion phase in the pre-trance state, reminding and of course reinforcing always that they are in control. Sometimes they just need to hear that. And that I'm bound to their free will, and it's client-centered. It's not about me. And no matter what arises, that they can take themselves out of the experience anytime, and it's all good. And sometimes that's all they need to hear, just that permission, not that it's real permission, and permission is not needed, but just knowing they have it, and all of that is part of just creating safe space from the first moment that they arrive. Everything that happens within the container of what we're doing together is safe and for the highest good. And you get to say stop and you get to say go. So some of it is just peppering that in, saying in the beginning, maybe even throughout. And if for any reason they feel overwhelmed, certainly that they are empowered to say so. And then I create a structure for the session, to progress it along. But I also tell them that everything I say is still only a suggestion. It's a good suggestion, I'll tell them. I'm suggesting you go to your death, but it's still only a suggestion that you can reject. And reminding them also that during the death scene, it's only a memory. Memory is energy. Memory is alive. Memory is a residue for sure. But at the same time, it's not happening now. Just that little reminder that they are alive and well, and this has already occurred, and that we want to occur it. We want to explore it, and then reassuring them that, that it's okay, and that if it's too intense, they can certainly turn down the intensity again, or float above, or detach, or zoom out, or take a little bit more of a faraway lens, or sometimes, and all this of course is very organic. So, no exact formula here, depending what they're expressing, but I remind them sometimes that they don't need to remember gory or graphic details or physical or emotional pain necessarily, if that's their concern. Sometimes I'll ask them, can you tap into the fear? Can you ask the fear what it's about? Can you sense what the fear needs to tell you? Is it something that you want to move through, or is it something that is a defense that you want to keep in place? And again, it all depends on really knowing your clients and their tolerance level for managing emotions. If you know your clients well, that they can manage it, then maybe they just need that little extra push, positive push. As therapists, we definitely know that we want our clients to lean into the emotions. We know that as therapists. It's to process and release it, feel it to heal it. The issues are in our tissues, but it's often counterintuitive to what they're feeling. They want to do everything not to feel it, so you go sacredly and you go gingerly into their world, and yet you hold the space for something more to happen within that container, more than on an ordinary day of avoiding, emotions. And so gauging their readiness. And then often just, again, knowing that we have influence, positive influence, and wielding that respectfully, but in a powerful way. I just use the word safe a lot. And I say, I'm here with you a lot. If I feel the hesitation or they report, some resistance, I'll say, yeah, you're not alone. I'm right here with you. I'm right by your side. And, reminding them that they're right on the edge of something powerful, possibly a breakthrough, possibly, right? And it's up to them, and most clients come with a rudimentary knowledge of past life regression. So it not usually an issue. In fact, I don't know that I've had the issue maybe once or twice, where they're resistant to going into their death, but they have a rudimentary knowledge of past life regression, and they know that they can remember dying. They know that they've died. They've opted into this experience knowing that to some degree, so it's not so out of the blue. Or I might have them ask themselves, what is the least amount I need to know from my death experience? What's the least amount? And I remind them that death is not an ending, so it's a beginning.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Andy. An unsuspecting client spontaneously encounters a negative or dark energy.
Okay. Well, when we're talking about intrusive energies, they range all the way from elementals, which are nature spirits, which are lovely little creatures, but they're just lost away, all the way through spirit attachments, all the way through to various energies that seem to be particularly predominant at the moment. And they're trying to stop the big shift that we're going through in the planet. And they often target light workers or their work. So there's quite a wide spectrum. I coined the word dark energy to cover a range of intrusive energies that are rather tricky to work with, and came up with some energetic ways which were passed to me by evolved spirits of light of how to work and clear them. I would say when I first started doing therapy work, spirit attachments only came up occasionally, but these days, I think you've got to really assume every client coming in has got some sort of intrusive energy. And you were talking about your spirit releasement course, and I would say, if anybody here hasn't done any work about clearing spirit attachments, it's definitely got to be high on your priority to get on a course like Holly's to learn how to do that. Working with other energies, I had one of my graduates phone me the other day, and she said, it's strange, but all of my clients have just stopped coming. Everything is just dead, and I don't know why. She was a really good marketeer and an amazing therapist. And she hadn't been vigilant, and she'd got a rather nasty intrusive energy on her, if you could call it a dark energy, and she hadn't checked. So I quickly cleared it from her and told her, look, you have to be really vigilant. You can get these things from clients. You can get things. I know Howard does a lot of work with aliens and UFOs. Sometimes people who have a fascination for that subject may very well have alien type energies. That's an intrusive energy that's kind of like working through them and encouraging them to be in that space. Or it can be just a normal spirit attachment that we get from anybody from day-to-day work. So making sure that you have your own energy protection is absolutely critical, that you've got the skills, certainly of being able to detect it. And if you can't clear it yourself, of having contacts you can turn to resolve and move them on. So it's a really important topic. It needs to be top agenda item for everybody who's working with clients these days. And I do a 2-day workshop specifically looking at energy techniques for people that are particularly interested in working with the more difficult type of energies. Or wherever you go to, there's good books about, there's a range of teachers that do the work. I think Patricia does work with clearing various energies on her workshops. So just go to wherever you're drawn to and make sure you have the skills to do it.
Thank you, Andy. Hey, Patricia, your client experiences several past lives at once.
Yeah, I think that's a really common thing in when people are just starting. And I don't mean clients, I mean practitioners. I think that, let me just ask a question. I don't see myself. Is my screen, am I showing? Oh, okay, good. It's weird. I have disappeared, so I don't know why. So I think it's very common for practitioners when they start out that happens. And so, and to me, that there's nothing, I'm not going to say there's nothing wrong with it. It is the way the psyche is structured. So I think you need to expect that. Again, as I was saying before, if you open up a file, the psyche works on similar resonance, right? It's symbolic resonance. So your job then as the practitioner is not to do, past life tourism, but to actually go in and clear a particular complex that's being presented, which may be at the core of that particular file that you opened up. So, if that happens with a client, what I always ask students to do, new practitioners to do, and myself, if a client does that, is that I'm going to say, I'm just going to be directive. If we started with strong affect, and that's always, again, so much of it has to do with your induction. If you don't start with strong affect and target the issue directly, you may find yourself what I call tripping around the astral plane. And, for people that have a mental curiosity about it, that's fine. That's not the work I do, right? Somebody comes to me, they want to heal panic attacks, tripping around the astral plane isn't going to do that, right? We need to go to the core of the panic attack. So if that's our objective that's agreed upon with the client, then if they jump out of that past life to another, and we had a strong affect to begin with, I'm going to direct them to stay with the particular character that we started with. So, it's either going to be, okay, woman in the house with the screaming husband. We're going right back there. So I'm going to be directive and use my energy to hold the space together, because we know when we hit trauma that fragmentation, dissociation is a big part of trauma affect. Again, one needs to know what they're doing to do that, but the recognition of that is important, because if you collude with the dissociation, you're not going to get to healing the issue. Now, the other caveat to that, though, is that if you've gone in with what you thought was a really strong affect, and an even stronger affect comes up, which may be a similar past life that's in the same theme, then I may jump lives, right? Then I may go with the one that has the stronger affect. That's rare. But, if somebody had started with what I would call a weak character to begin with, and like I said, a stronger affect arises and a whole other character shows up, then, we may jump to that one. Generally, I like to stay with one character, one story, one session. The other aspect of that can be if you have touched upon another character during the lifetime that showed up and had an identity, and you know what it is. Again, there's several layers of discernment of what needs to happen there. Back to what Andy's question was, is that a spirit attachment, right? Is that another one of their past lives? I may, when I go to the Bardo, after we've processed the one life that we decided to work on, sorry, my dog is having a fit. After we've processed that one life that we wanted to work on in the Bardo or the interlife state, I may call in the image of that other past life character, right? We can do some kind of gestalt dialogue, or we can at least identify it and say, this would be another session. Thank you for showing up. It's the same with spirit attachment, by the way. If I haven't cleared somebody's core issues, I'm not necessarily going to go for spirit attachment right away. I'm going to recognize the intrusive entity. I'm going to say, thank you for coming. That's not why we're here today. I'm going to deal with the core issues, because those entities will be sucking off that core issue. If you can clear the core issue, the next time you visit the entity, it's a little bit like flicking off a fly. It doesn't have so much juice to suck on. So again, be directive. If that's what your client has come to work on and you think you've hit the core affect, stay with it, direct your story back, your client back to the same character.
Thank you. All right, next one. This one's going to be, your client reveals during the session that you are a character in their past life. Andy.
Okay, this one's going to be a quick one. Quick answer. I personally have never experienced that. And when I was asked to answer this question, I thought, oh, okay, I'll ask a few colleagues. And I did have one or two who said, yeah, it's occasionally come up that clients have said that. So I think the first thing is that it's not a very common thing to happen. When I teach exploring past lives, I try to teach using very clean language, such as tell me more, describe what's happening, what's communicated. So the very fact that I may pop up in the past life doesn't really make any difference because you just continue. I mean, occasionally clients may say in the middle of the past life, they recognize one of the characters. And if you're one of the characters, they may say, yeah, you know, I recognize you, but you just continue. You know, what happens next? What's communicated? So it doesn't really make any difference. And if at the end of the session, they say, oh, I recognize you in the past life, well, okay. So they recognize you in the past life. I mean, it's much more what's the therapeutic benefit of the past life that's important rather than who they spot. The only caveat I would say is sometimes people who have a slightly weaker hold on their ego can perhaps over-identify with the therapist, and there can be an element of wishful thinking. And one of the clues for that is if clients, when you're right in the middle of the past life, want to stop and try to engage in a conversation. And if they started to engage in a conversation, which was, oh, I recognize you, oh, you're doing this, it's really nice to meet you, what do you think? Then that's a different thing. And then you have to handle that as a completely separate exercise. But that doesn't really happen very often if you do your screening correctly. So I've not really found it an issue.
A related issue to that, maybe you could address also, Andy, is what happens when during the past life regression, you start to experience being a part of their past life, that you're getting flashes and feelings come up and insights and triggers.
Yeah, well, of course, people are in multiple lives. I mean, it's slightly off tangent from your question. I had a really interesting experience on one of the workshops I was doing. There was two clients in two different bedrooms where they were doing the past life regression. And both of them were in exactly the same past life, but they were sisters. And towards the end of the past life, one of the sisters was dragged off by a mob and killed, and the other sister was full of grief about what had happened. And both of them at the same time were experiencing exactly the same past life, but from the different sister's perspective. And neither of them knew about that. So the aspect of people popping up in past lives is quite, a feasible thing to happen. What would I do if I recognize? I think the other thing I heard you saying is that if you start getting a feeling from the experience, I think we have to separate out whether we're being triggered by the events that are happening. I mean, for example, I was doing a workshop once and it was a past life rape, and I looked up and 3 of the students were in their own cathartic state because of watching the experience had triggered their own personal stuff. So as therapists, it's so important we clear our own stuff so that we're not triggered by emotions coming through. So as long as it's not being emotionally triggered, then you just continue with the story and allow it to emerge.
Yeah. Okay, Michele, your client is an animal. How do you help a client who discovers their aardvark?
It was funny. It almost sounded like a statement. Your client is an animal. I was like, oh, okay. Yes. So I love everything that's being said here. And, if your client reports, being an animal, then, we're gonna go with that and certainly not reject it and explore that, and remembering to trust them and what they're presenting, that everything that happens within the container of the session is certainly part of the session. There's nothing random, there's no coincidences, nothing comes from nothing. So I, would want to explore with them, are you does this feel like a past life of being an animal? Or does it feel like, currently you're having some merging of an experience with an animal right now? And just coming from curiosity and just asking them just sort of those open-ended questions, those questions, to explore more, to describe that, hoping to lead them into the felt sense of that, and there's value in just the felt sense of that, the description of what it is to be in the body, be the body of an animal and what that's like, so that as you do that, you'll elicit and evoke deeper layers of that. Sometimes I will have them, if it's not visual, ask themselves, what do I need to know here? What is this telling me? Where is this leading me? What does my subconscious want to tell me? So that ultimately we want to sort of assess if it's an independent, just sort of a sidebar that they want to have because it's pleasant for them, or whether, how we can tie it all in. And in my experience, certainly everything that is presented is almost really obvious most of the time, how it ties in. Sometimes it's not till the end of the session that we understand how it ties in, and it sometimes seems that it stands alone. So, we go into that, exploring that, but then always circling back to, human past life memories, and hoping and helping them to achieve the goal that they came with, the intention that they came with. So being open to using your intuition to how this is relevant for their human past lives, but still, we want to go, into that for a while and asking them what that experience is like for them and how that feels and what feels true about that and what resonates about that. And stopping and asking, okay, does that want to continue to unfold? Where does that lead you now? Does that feel stationary? Is there a environment, look, listen, and feel more in terms of that experience? And also I would probably probe around, is this you or a separate being outside of you? And maybe even at the end, inviting the animal self back in to revisit that, and in terms of the life lessons and how is this a mirror, if that's what it is, to try to get, is there trauma in the memory? Is this a memory of being an animal where there's trauma or where there's delight, or is it more metaphorical and more symbolic? And using your experience to ascertain that, as well as tapping into their wisest self, because we would say they know on some level what the deeper interpretation or is of this, or does it require interpretation, or is it more just an experience in that moment?
Thank you.
Yeah.
We got time for one more, and that'll be Patricia.
Okay, could I?
Sure. Go ahead, Andy.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to add to what Michele was saying. When I first started doing training, I had a student come running to me and said, my client's rabbit, what do I do? And I thought, well, rabbits, if you're doing a past life regression of a rabbit, they like eating grass, and then they probably pup a lot, and then they want to create some new rabbits. So I thought, well, there's probably not an awful lot there. So I said, why don't you just say to them, thank them and say, okay, we're now going to leave that and find a human past life, because obviously there's a lot of things in there to work with. And then I came across a wonderful colleague in Russia who said that virtually all of his work was working with animal past lives. So I thought, oh, okay, I'll keep an open mind. And then I had another client who came and they went into being a fly. So I said, no, what happens next? Oh, I'm being squashed. So that was very short. So we did some transformation of pushing away at the swatting, thinking, okay, we better get on and do some proper past life work. And he came out and said, that was a most amazing experience. That's just how I feel in this life, being squashed. And he said, that strength and be able to push away, he said, I can take that with me and it's really helpful. So I don't know whether it was a metaphor or whether it was a real past life, but you know, sometimes when you follow your intuition, you can get the most amazing results.
Great story. Okay, our last one is for Patricia, and this one is, your client continues to return to the same past life in a sequence of sessions.
Great. I'm sorry, I have to answer this last one because it's actually a different answer, and I think it's really useful to people to hear different perspectives on that one question. I had a student in a workshop who her first imagery was she was a fallen angel, and then she started to identify with the white wing, and then she was a dove. So it was a student working with her. So then I went over and got her into a character, basically by telling her, let's do something a little more human. And I'll tell you what happened. She was a young girl who was a gypsy girl whose family took care of doves. You know, they had them on the road with them, and they were captured by the Nazis. And she was thrown into a pit as a 5-year-old with dead, bleeding bodies on top of her, clutching her white dove. Mm-hmm. So what that client first contacted was a dissociative memory. And a 5-year-old past life self, so highly traumatized, is going to do that. So again, I would say it's a discernment, right? For me, I always want to go for the core content. And anyway, okay, so returning to the same past life, not uncommon, and picks up on some of the themes that you asked about before and that Andy answered as well. There are certainly some in complex trauma, and the definition of complex trauma being where you have repetition of trauma, either the same trauma or other traumas in a single lifetime. In complex trauma, you're probably not going to clear it all in one session, right? So returning to that past life may be necessary. And in fact, I remember one of my core stories, which was where I was tortured and had my tongue cut out at the end. I went back to that life about 5 or 6 times and never wanted to. You know, I never wanted to go there. And it wasn't only triggered in regression, it was actually triggered by going to the dentist for root canal, right? And rolfing and massage brought up different layers, and I found myself right back in that. With complex trauma like that, because in torture, they're very skilled at wanting to break you layer by layer by layer. That's exactly what I experienced. And I know clients the same way. In complex trauma, you can go back. Now, what will happen though is over time, you will find that that particular past life memory loses its juice. And it loses its juice because you've gone through the layers. You know, we often say that trauma is multi-layered like an onion. And so once you go through the different layers and have gone through all, again, in specific cases of complex trauma, you have gone through all the different layers and given them resolution and healing. If they go back to that past life, in fact, I had it happen just in my last workshop with students, and we went back into the past life, and there wasn't so much a residue there as much as something needed to be touched upon. It was a particular affect, and then that was used to jump into another lifetime. And then that other lifetime was the one that kind of cleared out that, that file. So I think that it's not uncommon. I think it can happen. And, be aware if you're picking up a different aspect, or what's the word I want to say? A different aspect of what the original trauma was, or if you're dealing with complex trauma. The other way to put a closure on that is if you've done, and this relates also to series of similar lives. If you've done a series of similar lives, like going back to my example of the abandonment file, if you've pretty much cleaned out that file and done maybe 5 or 6 of those with a client, you then might want to jump to what we call a resource life. And a resource life is a way of giving the client the blueprint for how not to be abandoned again, right? Because the theory is, and I came up with that term resource life, the theory is that somewhere in your soul's memory, there's a memory of belonging, of being wanted, of being loved. Now, again, I don't go for resource lives in the beginning. That's more the filling. You have to do the root canal first. If you put a filling on a rotten tooth, that's not going to be very good, right? So you have to do the drilling, you have to do the root canal. But if the client keeps returning to that repetitive theme, then you want to give a resource life, because then it's like letting the soul remember it can be this again, right? And quite frequently, those resource lives are lives, again, let's counter the abandonment issue. Somebody's been abandoned repeatedly, then they finally can go to a resource life. And in that resource life, they're loved, they're wanted, they're this, they're that. Then moving forward, it's like you're bringing in the soul's memory of, that's a possibility too, because we do know that trauma is repetitive. We know that the soul does the repetition compulsion thing. So, so there's that.
Thank you. Wow, great information. Let's go back to the group here and invite people to ask questions. And if you just raise your hand, I'll look at the screen here. Let me know what your question, just say your question and ask whomever you want to talk about it. Howard.
Yes. First, Patricia, I love your metaphors. Second, I think this is a wonderful format for presentation and discussion among people that have a variety of experiences. It's been very helpful to me. But I wanted to comment on your complex trauma and re-traumatization themes that you were asked about. And it seems to me like the past lives that you considered were re-traumatizations were in fact the subsequent sensitizing event, as Cal Panion calls them. The suggestion that I've always used is, does this past life feel like brand new, or does it feel like, uh-oh, here we go again? If it's, uh-oh, here we go again, go back to the initial sensitizing event. I know from my own personal experience, undergoing much hypnotherapy, that's what cleared out the single major issue in my own life. So I know that works. And affect bridge is the way to get people into a past life reliably and quickly. No doubt about it. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Howard. And Greg, I saw you had your hand up too.
Yeah, I wanted to just comment on spirit releasement therapy, which I know you're going to be teaching it. That's great. And Andy was commenting on how that has to be a priority for therapists. And in my book, The New Regression Therapy, there's a whole section on protocols, how to identify the types of entities attached, and different protocols for clearing, just so that people know that. Something you can read about that. And it's available on Amazon.
Thank you, Greg. Other questions?
Holly, I have a question. I just don't seem to have the raised hand function today.
Peggy?
Okay, thank you. I am wondering, and I'm sorry for not showing my face. I'm madly cleaning and not really presentable, but I'm wondering if any of you have had the experience where you've entered your client's regression experience and see figures that they don't necessarily see. The way that I have dealt with that, which seems to be working fine, is that, like, say I see someone standing over by a tree and the client is walking down a road, and I'll have them stop in that area and say, you know, let's just look around right here, and, you know, look to your left, look to your right. And if they don't see the figure behind the tree, then I feel like it's not their time to see that figure. But sometimes they do see it, and then they go and they interact. Has anyone else had that experience? And if you have, how do you manage that?
Yeah, I'd like to answer that because it happens. I mean, I don't know how to regress somebody without being in their past life. So
Right.
it's kind of, you know, I journey with them, right?
Yes.
I don't, you know, I did shamanic work before I even did regression, and that work was about going in and tracking and getting a whole story and following stuff without any clues from the client. So I don't really know how to do it without doing that. What I am careful with, though, is I never interject my perspective, like you said.
Yes.
And no, I'm not saying you did. I'm saying I never interject my perspective into a client's session. But I know people have observed it at workshops all the time, that the client will be at a particular point with it, and I'll already be grabbing the towel to get the baby, you know, the baby prop, right? And then they'll be like, oh, I'm pregnant, right? You know, and I was like, yeah, I already saw that. It doesn't matter, right? What is important, I think, about what your question is that resonance is what holds the client deeply within the session, and also allows for really deep healing to happen. Because when you can journey with your client with that, like that, that's what makes Zoom sessions so effective for me. Because through COVID, I worked on Zoom, right?
Mhm.
And it was totally not mental level. You know, when I would meet with somebody and we talk, you know, do the regular interview, but when it comes time to do the session, I go and lay down with them while they're doing it with the cameras off, and I'm journeying with them. So, and that held the energy, and people would say, it feels like you're there with me. That's because I am. And I think that's a really valuable thing. So I wouldn't say that there's anything you need to do with it, as much as recognize that that's a great empathetic, intuitive ability, and probably adds a lot to your sessions.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And it is affirming that, you know, to not interject, to not say, are you sure you don't see a figure behind that tree? You know, because I don't, they're not ready for that. Or it's, yeah, just to acknowledge they know that I see them, you know, that figure, but this is not the time. Thank you.
Yeah, could I add something? For me, the most important thing about navigating the past life is, like a detective, looking for the shutdowns or the significant events that are likely to be patterns with the current life. That's what I'm looking for. So if someone's going through some, I don't know, a field, and you may have a feeling that there's some trees there, unless this is associated with a shutdown, I'm not really too interested. You know, I just let the story continue. What I am interested in, though, is if, for example, a young girl was walking through a forest and then all of a sudden says, oh, I'm hanging up by my legs now, I'm dead. They've rushed through a trauma, and then I want to go all the way back to the beginning of that and go through it slowly to uncover what the trauma is. Or if they suddenly come out and say, oh, I'm looking down at myself walking through the forest, they've disassociated. And again, that's another clue for trauma. So I'm like a detective, and I'm looking for those events the whole time in the past life. So I have a slightly different focus when I'm working. So I don't know if that is of help to you.
Thank you, Andy. Other questions? Comments are welcome as well, if anybody has comments on any of the topics. Yes, Donna.
I think that it's really important for all of us, especially in doing a past life regression, to understand that not everyone is visual. So there is a lot more information coming out about aphantasia. And if you're not familiar with that terminology, I would suggest that you check out Aphantasia Network, perhaps. I was recently contacted by a client that I saw in 2017, and 4 months ago, she found out about aphantasia, and she's viewing it as a disability. And oh my God, what do I do? What's wrong with my brain? And so there's considerable research that's coming up, and it's very important. I put out my question on my intake paperwork, allows me to find out whether or not they are visual. So I asked them about if you were thinking back to a memory from the past, are you more visual, thinking, or feeling? And then I talk with them about that, because I think it's important, number one, for me to know in structuring the session, but also if they are aphantasic, then I can make a referral for them to know that there are resources to get a better understanding of that, and to not think that there's something wrong with them. That's all.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Would you
Could I
spell that
take
for
that?
us? Would you spell aphantasia for us?
Aphantasia.
Thank you.
And some people would say that, if you are, I'm completely aphantasic. So I have no visual imagination, no sense of smell in my head, no sense of sound. I cannot play music in my head. And what's the other one? Anyway, it's just getting to know yourself better. So some people call it aphant, depending on what organization is. Another would be aphantasic.
Okay.
And yeah, so the research is coming out. They're doing a lot of surveys with us.
Yeah.
Andy,
Could I? Yeah. A really good point, Donna. And I think Patricia touched on that before when she was talking about one of the most important experiences she had in a past life was all physical memories.
Yes.
So I tend to try to teach keeping clean questions, such as what happens next, describe what's happening, tell me more about it, because then people can either be visual, kinesthetic, and there's no prejudgment. Because if you start asking what you see and someone isn't visual, it kind of like really puts them off. They start to come out of the session and makes it hard for them to. So sometimes if we get into the right habits of asking these questions at the beginning, then it makes the whole process of flowing with the past life so much easier.
Yes, exactly.
Agreed. The one phrase I always teach people to use, and I use myself, is what are you aware of? And that allows all of the senses to be able to, because the body has awareness, the inner knowing. I mean, this is the thing we forget. Most people are not clairvoyant, which is the inner counterpart to our outer sense of vision. Most people are kinesthetic or clairsentient. That is the most dominant inner sense. So if we do bias ourselves towards mental imagery, we're disservicing our clients. And exactly, it is simply, what are you aware of?
Yep, what's happening.
Yeah.
More questions, comments?
Carol's got her hand up.
Carol. Hi, Carol.
What a great format. I'm loving this. And I missed the very first part of it, but boy, has it been dynamic ever since I hopped on. I love the question about the animal thing, and it reminded me that I'm looking for statistics. So one of the things about animals is, was the animal experience did it happen before coming into humans or to a human body, or does it happen interchangeably with a human body? And so I'm looking for some statistics on that, as well as other things. I'm working on a book about reincarnation. And so that's something that keeps coming up, you know, whether a person has metasymptosis, where they go back and forth, like Hindus believe you can, animal to person, or whether there's an evolutionary process. Have you experienced either of those in your animal clients?
Yeah, I have. I actually had one of my own where my guides actually tricked me into an animal body out of the bardo because I was so resistant in the bardo to any kind of healing. I was so traumatized in the life. I was literally sitting in the corner shaking. I wouldn't let the guide work with me. I wouldn't let anybody work with me. And then the guides tricked me, basically, by kind of showing me this pot of dolphins down there. And they were like, just go look at that. And I was looking, and I was looking down, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then bang, I was in the body of a dolphin. And realized that what they were doing was bringing back that memory. And it was ecstatic. I actually went into Reiki and body streaming in that session, which is only that was the first time I experienced it. And I've only experienced it twice in regression, but it's quite a powerful experience because it was so counter to the particular life where I had been abandoned and alone and traumatized and blah, blah, blah. So that's a personal answer to your question. Statistically, I can't give you that answer because I don't have that many cases, like I said, where I would allow that kind of experience unless it has a therapeutic value. So if somebody goes into an animal life, if it has a therapeutic value, we'll go there. Generally, I find that can also be a dissociative image. So I haven't entertained those for too long. So I can't add to your statistics, but I could say I had an experience that somewhere in my incarnational history, I was a dolphin and it was freaking awesome.
Yeah, I agree with Patricia. That's my view. I very rarely use them. So I can't offer anything in terms of information from my own experiences. But you may want to have a look at my book, Exploring the Eternal Soul, because half the book now was the research I did with elders who evolve spirits of light that are beyond the need to reincarnate. And I asked them a whole series of questions. And I asked the same questions to several different groups just to sort of make sure that there was no conscious mind interference involved in it. And I was asking questions. One of them was about past life of animals and past life of humans, and whether people can move from past lives to humans and so on. And from that, I seem to recall it can happen, but it doesn't happen too often. They tend to be separate evolutionary cycles. Although I'm of the view that with this big shift we're going through, there's a lot of things happening. A lot of the animal kingdom are starting to move into the human world. The human world are moving into the realms of where spirit guides and so on have been working. So things are shifting, but it's a sort of question I would tend to ask evolved spirits of light to get their perspective, because they've got a slightly wider set of information to draw on.
That's good.
One last question, comment? Yes, Deb.
Hi, Patricia, you started to talk about some of the modifications you have made in working with clients through Zoom. I'm wondering what other challenges and modifications you have made, and the others as well.
I'm sorry, so what would be, I'm not sure I understand the question. You said modifications.
But just how has it been for you doing the regression sessions through Zoom, and how is it different and what challenges and sort of modifications or changes have you made?
Oh, I see. You know, not, I mean, certainly you can't touch a client, but it hasn't stopped from cathartic sessions at all. And in fact, if I suspect that prior to the session that, you know, there's going to be, especially if somebody's coming for something physical, right? Like I had somebody in Brazil who had a disembowelment or had IBS in this life. And I suspected a disembowelment. So even before the session, you know, I always have my client set up, but it was a Zoom session. So I have my instructions, but I give extra instructions. And I said to the person, I want you, you know, obviously in a quiet place where you can blah, 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 you know, all of that stuff. But I made sure that they had a dowel. And I made sure that they had a pillow or a mattress against the wall that they were laying towards, you know, so I said, I want you laying on the floor and I want you to have some cushion on the wall where your feet are, just as a preparation. And of course, when we went into the disembowelment, it was exactly that. And I told them, I directed them, grab the dowel, go ahead, feel it, you know, they went into it. And then of course, we were able to do the physical reversal and they were able to use the, you know, get their legs going by kicking without hurting themselves or the wall, because I had them pre-prepared. One thing I have done though, in the last couple of years with, you know, doing almost all of my sessions on Zoom, is I've generally not wanted to do the physical. Like if people are coming specifically for a physical, I've said, you know, that's going to be better in person, blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't stop. I mean, I have done it, but the point is I wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't make that my mainstay. I would certainly want to be in person working with somebody through that kind of physical stuff. But anyway, you know, we could have another discussion on it. I could do a Zoom for students on how to do a Zoom session if you want. Deb's one of my graduates, so I can put something together like that.
Yeah.
And one of our first gatherings was about this whole topic. So if you guys go on YouTube, there's a whole presentation that a bunch of people made on that. It was during COVID.
Yeah.
You
Could
wanna
I?
comment on that?
Yeah. I just like to, but I agree entirely with what Patricia said. And I do body therapy very similar to how Patricia does it. So I do a lot of trauma work as well. And whereas you can do a lot of work with Zoom, if someone's coming in and they've got really deep trauma, I would much rather do an in-person session or encourage them to work with another therapist that lives close enough for them to do that session and then do all the other work myself. But having said that, sometimes I've had to use body therapy because it's come up in the middle of a session. You can't just stop it. So I have developed some adaptations to make the process work. And just a couple of things that I found helpful is one of the big difficulties about doing body therapy on Zoom is when you're doing it in person, you create a lot of psychodrama by giving resistance and then suddenly releasing it. It's like creating the internal pressure and then the logjam gets blown apart. And that's such an important part of body therapy. So I try to recreate that by giving the instructions that initially there'll be resistance and then it'll suddenly be released. And then I do a lot of work to build up the psychodrama and then there's a sudden release. So I get as close as I can, which does help. It's not as good as doing it in person. And I also work with spirit guides and ask them to do some energetic work to clear cathartic aspects that may not be fully cleared because I've not been doing it in person work. So you can cope and it's amazing the results you get. But I would normally say if there's trauma, do it in person and only ever do it by Zoom if you know other option. You know, it's an emergency and you have to cope the best you can.
Okay.
Thank you.
Does everybody feel complete? Okay, I would love to give any of you who have announcements a little time just to make a quick announcement. Does anybody have any announcements that might benefit our community?
Well, speaking of coming out of COVID, I mean, I don't know how the rest of you were teaching. I didn't teach since 2019, but started classes again last year. So I'm happy to say I'm on my level 3 with group I started last year, and the new level starting up in September in North Carolina. So level 1 coming up in North Carolina, I guess I would say, I would add.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I mentioned before a 2-day energy workshop. It's done by the internet classroom. So if you go on to my website, www.regressionacademy.com, or just type in Andy Tomlinson, I'm sure you'll find it. There's got one to US time zones in October. And the other course you may find interesting is one of my colleagues is doing a course on spiritual emergency. And this is when people's spiritual emergence happens too quickly and they become out of control and become almost psychotic-like. And there's some very simple techniques for handling that. So you'll find the details of that on the website too.
Okay. Valerie, would you do a little prayer or a closing for us, please?
Yes. First of all, I'd like to thank all of our presenters, and I'd like to thank all of our members and board for putting this presentation together. So if everybody would close their eyes just for a moment. And now, with gratitude in our hearts, we give thanks to all who have made this gathering possible. And I ask you to tap into this gratitude for a moment, experience it, however you experience it, whether it's visually, kinesthetically, any way you can visualize it, as light, as color, as energy, allowing your gratitude to travel out through your room, through your town, now through your country, seeing it flowing out and bathing our world with its magnificent light, touching and uplifting all life as we allow this work to uplift and expand us all, everyone we work with, expanding consciousness and all that is, always remembering that we are all connected. And so it is.
So it is.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you, presenters, for your expertise, your wisdom, and your presence.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll get to see you all next month when we learn about social media.
And thank you, Holly. Nice job of
Okay.
facilitating. Good
Yeah,
moderator.
thank you.
Yes, thank you,
Organizing,
Holly.
facilitating.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Nice
you all.
meeting you.
Great, wonderful.
Well,
Bye.
Stay in
Bye,
touch.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Holly, can you just stay on for a moment?
Yes.
after
Thank
the,
Bye, Andy.
Okay, bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Sorry, Holly, it was just a quick question.
Yes.
When you, I mean, it's a great workshop, a great Zoom meeting. So thank you so much for it, and thank you for the invite. I do really appreciate that. The question I have for you is, when you do these webinars or meetings, do you put energy protection around it all?
Do I
Mm,
personally?
yeah.
I have been doing this for 30 years and I don't even consciously think about it most of the time anymore. It's like, do you sense something?
I had to put energy protection around the whole workshop when I came. So I just suggest that maybe you start just thinking about it, maybe even working with your guides to put stronger energy around, because there's a lot of energies around that are interfering with light workers and the work we're doing. And you're doing such amazing work. So many powerful light workers have joined this meeting. And it's like each of us have got like little candles, and when we're together, we're like a lighthouse. And some of these energies make a beeline towards it. So you may want to just think
I use
about
a
it.
technique of a soul star and a vortex when I do my classes and workshops.
Yeah, well, whatever you
And-
do,
Yeah,
do it and just check with a pendulum whether it's sufficient for
Okay.
the meeting that you've got.
thank
So I hope
you.
you don't mind me
Not at
mentioning
all,
that.
not at all.
Okay,
It's a good
perfect.
reminder. I bless you for having this wisdom to share it.
Okay.
Okay.
So wonderful
Take care.
seeing you again. Thank you, Holly.
You
Bye.
too. Bless you.
Bye.